Hello, everybody. Welcome. It's a bit of a gray day today, but I'm so excited to have this chance to wander in the living places and learn and unforget and see beyond the constructs that often dominate our cognition, our minds, our awareness, our memory, our origins. There's some origin right there. And our relationships, our behavior. Just taking a moment to honor all of those beings who dreamed and were possessed by visions of virtue and beauty, creativity, intelligence, play, mutual rescue, and who dreamed of becoming the world together. In the opposite of the image of any mechanical technology. I honor those beings, my mentors, my people, my origins, my dreaming, the food and the water, the living light that we arise within and for, in abject violation of what we think and believe. In fact, in violation of what we are capable of thinking. Because the primary ability library of the mind, while it can easily be captured and reduced to thinking, has nearly nothing to do with thinking. In the same way that the existence of a fork has nothing to do with the urgent imperatives that brought you to life, to awareness, to incarnation. So I have a plethora of bookmarks. Just listening to a podcast. This often happens to me. I have no idea what the names of the people who are speaking are. Perhaps I will link it. But I heard a quote from Jeffrey Kripal. Kripal, I'll go with. That was echoed by the host of the podcast. And I believe it was in reference to the UFO UAP phenomena, but I suspect it was in reference to everything that gets collected under the rubric of the paranormal. And Kripal said, I take these phenomena seriously, but I do not take them literally. What about that? Yeah. Apparently, somehow, it was decided over, the developmental arc of the evolution of human cognition and what we usually call consciousness, but I think is more cognitive. Apparently, at some point, it was decided that only things that were literally true were real. Yeah, and anything else was just grifting and LARPing and, dissociation, madness, schizophrenia, psychosis, drug use, mistakes, seeing something and just getting it wrong in terms of what it is you're seeing. Because obviously, what it is somehow became the most important thing to determine. And anyone who's paying attention when you see this phenomena beginning to emerge in the behavior and the writing and the thought of different peoples in different places, but primarily the colonizing peoples, right? The peoples who want everything to be rendered into commodities. At some point when this arises, anyone who is watching this from above that timeline would see a monumental danger that I'm trying to make a metaphor for. Right? One can imagine a strange situation where the literal divinity of the king and queen is so much more important than their existence in the minds of the people that when they're born, perhaps they get to live a few years, and then we remove all their organs and we put them in little vases and stuff, and we mummify the body. And there are special people who can talk to the dead body, the mummified body, and receive its commands. And these are then transmitted to the people who then go on colonizing each other and the world. Right? So, like, when did the dead thing, the thing that was never alive, that can't be alive or intelligent, that is the standing opposite of anything like origin, spirit, memory, dreaming, right? It's just the structured remains of what was evicted. When did that become the arbiter of truth, the real, the facts? And the more that our species travels in this direction, the more dissociated, confused. It's like you're born with 7 wings, and you replace the first one with a pencil and the second one with a protractor, right? And the third one with some kind of video screen, and you just keep going until there's no more wings, and the creature that was meant to fly in the networks of origin and relation, being, adoration, wonder, awe, true intelligence, beauty, virtue, that creature becomes a strange statue of the history of these evictions, these representations, the replacement of faculties with objects, the replacement of beings with objects, the replacement of concern with money, right? The replacement of intelligence with the facts and the hypotheses and reproducibility. Not that those last things are unuseful, but we have to notice when, the little parakeet that visits us every morning for some bird seed becomes a mechanical dragon that intends to eat everything that moves and most of what doesn't. Surprising that nobody's really watching this, or if they are, they can't understand it. But there's a lot of good reasons why they can't understand it, and most of those reasons have to do with the replacement of the instruments of understanding, which are not actually instruments, right? These are much more like organs. The replacement of the organs of understanding with instruments that provide a kind, a mode of certainty, absolute certainty. The front door is locked, right? And if the scope of your concern is that limited, then you can get that high degree of certainty. But wherever the scope contains many variables or involves relationships, your capacity to acquire that certainty mostly disappears or can be counterfeited very effectively by manipulating the relationships and seeding them with fictions and lies. Money, primarily among those deleterious demons. So you can get to certainty about relationships by collapsing them, by collapsing their complexity to 2 or 3 vectors that you can easily, if not overtly control, you can profoundly influence them, and you can keep that process eating its own results until what's left, again, are just the representations. Money is a great example of this. Imagine if in a cartoon, right, humans are deprived of the capacities of speech, writing, or seeing each other, and now they can only communicate by the exchange of dollars. So we'd have to build a language in the commodity exchange space that, yeah, you see the problem. Now, unfortunately, shit like that can actually occur, right? This is in no way off the table. In fact, many aspects of our modern experience closely resemble this figure that seems ridiculous at first glance, but isn't half as ridiculous as most of what we're actually subjected to thinking, doing, and so forth. So there's a specific there's a bunch of specific figures that I have in my mind. I'm gonna wander through some bookmarks here. And I'm going to get started with one of them very simply. I've heard 2 versions of this completely ridiculous demand. Right? And I have no idea who came up with this first, but I'm not actually sure that it was... You see, a person can be not a person, right? And this is crucially important. We are confused by our reliance on categories to determine the nature, character, or identity of phenomenal situations or their participants or separable aspects, right? So, when is a person not a person? Well, you can do this sort of 2 primary ways. There's many ways to view this. One is when the person is fully at ease and free. We can imagine that they quote unquote are themselves, but the degree to which they can become themselves varies dramatically depending on the contexts and the relational participants they are with. Right? And we largely fail to imagine what a really amazing context would be like, though we have some examples of this. And often, ironically, we can be more ourselves when there are very intelligent constraints on purpose, communal intention, what we choose to do together. So most of us don't actually know ourselves, and the reason that we don't know ourselves is that we are so rarely in a context where the breadth and depth and complexity, the many-winged bird of our natures, is not merely free to come forth and be seen and celebrated and expressed and enacted. It is invoked by the communal will, intention, integrity, and history, creativity, playfulness. Right? We are so rarely in a context like this, and Facebook and Twitter are its standing opposites. Right? This is the opposite of this kind of a context. That we don't know ourselves, so the idea that someone else knows us, right, and knows, quote, who I am, right, you know, is insane. Hey, good to see you. I love you. So you can see that there's a fiction here, right? A foundational fiction. Of course I know myself, really. But what kinds of contexts have you been in where your actual self is free and invited and celebrated, unthreatened, uncaptured, unsurveilled, right? Or you're subject to the opposite of what we mostly experience, so that instead of negative or critical surveillance or manipulative surveillance or judgmental surveillance, you are subjected to positive, encouraging, reassuring, celebratory surveillance. The difference between, for example, a critical read of someone and a generous read. Now, there are a few people wandering around who, being in possession of certain data points about my experience, history, or behavior, have decided to collapse my identity into those specific data points, right? And then see me as those data points. And sometimes this is kind of a positive thing, even though it's confused. But often, particularly these days, where we are being scripted to accuse and point fingers and scapegoat and judge each other, to give the worst possible critical read rather than introduce any generosity. This has become a disease. So I don't know where this quip comes from originally. The name that comes to mind is Carl Sagan, but I doubt it originated there. Possible. And the quip is, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Sounds trustworthy on the surface, doesn't it? But this is the kind of injunction, right, an admonition that it bears the imprimatur of the disconnected from itself and the right hemisphere aspects of awareness, concern, and ways of being in the world. This is the left hemisphere's way par excellence. And whenever the left hemisphere-like aspects are forging a statement like this in the mouth of a living human being, or in their writings or teachings, there's almost always a staggering irony right next door to the statement that the aura, the authoritative aura of the statement occludes. And in this case, it's fairly easy to show this irony, because what's actually going on here is a classic example of something resembling the concept of projection in psychology, which is, roughly speaking, clumsily speaking, I take what I will not look at in myself and I project it onto someone else, and then I evaluate that person negatively, in most cases, though positive projection can also happen. And then a variety of judgments and transformations of behavior, expectation, commodification, representation take place. So So I want to show one of the pivots that gives the lie to the statement. Before I do that, I'm just going to give the other form. And I think I first heard this from Avi Loeb. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary research. Now, these are very similar structures in language. And language is so compelling, hypnotic really in a way, fundamentally hypnotic. Because in order to interpret it, we must subject our imaginations to the implications of the statements. And once our imaginations coincide with the semantic imperatives, right, the instructions that are in the language, usually unseen by us, we are already half hypnotized, right? We have the degrees of liberty in the mind have collapsed in a way that doesn't announce their collapse. And the product of this is a kind of authority in the mind, right? And this authority is a lieutenant, right? It's a placeholder, a stand-in for true authority. And if you ask what true authority is, well, that's a weird thing because it's both the origins of being. Around here, the most obvious of these are threefold, fourfold. Time, space, the sun, the moon, the earth, fivefold. This is like the Spanish Inquisition, just keeps expanding. The living beings, and a sort of summation space over the mind's intense dreams, experiences, intelligences, and urgencies of those living beings. We could call this the chorus. I think Amon Hillman has some ideas about this that are not dissimilar to mine. They resemble them closely. If you are not receiving the information from the chorus, if you have changed the channel and now you're just looking at representations, which are the absence of the chorus, that counterfeit its authority, wow, you've got a compass that basically only lies to you, but it lies to you in such a structured and compelling way that you can never look away from it. Does that sound familiar? So both of these statements are bullshit. Or rather, they are mostly bullshit. They're just a very effective form of lying about what I would call ontological primitives. Yeah? Necessities that underlie what we would think of as rational, i.e. parts-based ontologies. These are not chorus-based. These are parts-based. And they're not even parts-based. They're representations of parts-based. So you evict the parts, you cut things into parts, then you throw those parts away, you put some concept where a living being or mind or intention once existed, and then you worship those concepts and their structural linkages and implications, implicature, in the words of Grice. And wow, you can become more disoriented than this too. This isn't the end of the problem. This is the beginning of the problem. This is its inception. The wild mutations it undergoes post-inception are unimaginable to the common person, but they can be illuminated to thought, awareness, concern, and mediation, right? Remediation. So let me try to point up the irony here. We'll start with the simple statement. So often repeated by skeptics and debunkers. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Most likely this arose in the aura of the UFO UAP phenomena, probably in the 1970s, possibly earlier. So I'm going to invert that statement. Let's see if I can pull this off. I did it so beautifully last night and failed to record it. And by the way, there's the things that we are speaking of and exploring here are essentially forbidden to speak of or explore, not explicitly, but these are things that you're supposed to not pay attention to, right? And not bring up at the company coffee clatch in the morning, presuming that anything resembling that still occurs. The proposition that reality is comprised only of the physical aspects, continuous in identity and time, empty of metaphysical origin, implication, or content, comprises an extraordinary claim that is so monumentally extraordinary and without any evidence to support it at all. Right? That if extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, then the claim of a dead inside reality that is the mechanical accident of only physical phenomena is the most extraordinary claim that has ever been made and has gone largely unexamined in the academy for hundreds of years and billions of human lifetimes. There is no claim more extraordinary than that reality is empty of anything resembling soul, spirit, innate intelligence, transcendence, origin, relational synchrony, right? All of these things. So it's as if we threw away everything that was fundamental and then attempted by some bizarre form of technical recapitulation to explain away its absences. It is impossible to make a more extraordinary and less evidenced claim than that, and that is the projection, right? So this aspect that in the humans produces this urge for dead, manipulable derivatives, right, is pointing a finger at everything that isn't it and saying, you are so extraordinary and unevidenced that we should not even entertain the possibility of your existence or meaning or any of that. And so we're going to flip that around. We're going to put the burden on you, right? Because, unfortunately, and catastrophically, over human history, as our interior intelligences collapsed into representations, it became de rigueur, right? The common method to admit to consideration, thought, awareness, authorization, only those phenomena that could be understood as literal. And if you had to do that in the language you speak, you would no longer be able to communicate with it at all, right? So there's no claim more extraordinary than this. And no, it's impossible, it might be impossible to form a claim that is less evidenced than this. What's the admonition from the factory of representations, right? Oh, you guys are just making stuff up that's really silly because there's no physical evidence of it being true. Right? Everything that matters to being human, there's no physical evidence of. There was a great trope in the podcast where one of the participants was saying that they've traveled to many countries and learned some other languages, and they've discovered that in other languages, people have very different ideas about what time might be. And these are expressed in figures within the language, not always literally, right? It's not just that they give you a model, right? And, we are all aware of the reality of love, but I dare you to metrically measure it and produce the proofs of it. You have the same problem with representational cognition, right? There's a prior, see? There's a prior that's being occluded. And the prior is that without imagination, proofs are meaningless. So you have to be able to make things up and to envision things which are not the case in order to determine, in order to have any chance of determining anything about what is or might be partly the case. And the primary problem is that in representational cognition land, which is a strange kind of admixture of Disneyland, AI, and a prison system, only the completed literal results of an analysis are given credence. So this is similar to me looking around for some phenomena that is the most changeless over time, right? No transformation of identity, character, etc. And then promoting that to the arbiter of authority over all phenomena. Okay. So this would be like me worshiping a piece of silverware, cognitively, intellectually, because it presents the least refutable instance of a phenomena at all. Right. So then, from that mess, the next step is we evict all phenomena that are not as literal and explicit, as single-valued, as reliable, continuous, over time, as a piece of silverware. And we call all that LARPing and grifting and whatever you want to, make up names for it. Psychosis, imagination. Really goes back to the primal imprecation against imagination. You're just making that up. Really? I wonder if it would be possible for you to admit that, to emit that statement, if you had not composed it with your imagination. So, in order to emit a statement, you had to make it up. In order to emit an analysis, you had to make it up. So there's this valence between this is nuts. I mean, this stuff is crazy. And I can explain this usually very clearly and compellingly to people, and they really don't get it, which is on me, not them. That's my fault. The onus of producing compelling oration lies with the orator, though a portion of it is catalyzed and fertilized by audiences, kind of secretly, because we imagine that the mind of the orator, particularly today, like if I'm making this podcast, is separate from the mind of my listeners, and therefore cannot import their concerns or intelligences or experiences, cannot integrate those, cannot produce an amalgam that is beautiful and somewhat representative of a mini version of the chorus, right? But that is a fiction. We do this all the time. We just have no model or explanation that we like for it. And if it isn't, in case it isn't obvious, these systems we call LLMs are representations of the absence of the chorus, and they are meant to replace it and ensure it does not arise. Very surprising, this. Very surprising. So I find, I'm I essentially grew up as something of a systems analyst. And anyone who's precocious has some degree of these intelligences and these concerns. And so when I speak about these matters, I'm speaking from a perspective of someone who's trying to understand how the original systems degraded, what they degraded into, what replaced them, why it succeeds, how it acquires authority in consciousness and human concern, expectation, and behavior, and what has to be destroyed for that to happen. Right? What are the costs, so to speak? I think I'll take a break, meditate, and I'll come back for part 2 with a much more settled mind. Stay with me. All right. The mind is so different after meditation. My orientation is radically changed, but I have recovered a few bookmarks. So earlier in my walk and talk, I opened a thread that I failed to close properly, which was, what about when the person in front of you is not a person? And I'm going to be doing a recording about this with some props sometime soon. But is it possible to encounter, for example, a tree? Everyone would agree this is a tree, everyone's standing around you, and yet it is not a tree. And one of the questions is, when evaluating identity, is it the category that tells us, quote, what, or quote, who something or someone is, presuming that there even are things? I mean, the only things that I am inclined to admit are artificial objects. I don't really believe there are any other things. Or rather, it's not my common way of understanding phenomena to go around thingifying it. I prefer the living foot rather than the shoe. But could you encounter a raccoon that is not fundamentally a raccoon? All observers would agree that the form is that of a raccoon, but how do we know what's inside it? Well, there's some ways, there's some things you can do, but even those things are tricky. Young raven. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, 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 oh. Not as young as I supposed. Inside the mouth of the raven it is black, so it's not as young. Oh, 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 oh. Here comes the Stellar's jay. Oh, there's a couple of them. Now you see, I use the language that I was trained to use, and I understand something of the implications. of the system, having become very concerned with its structures and origins. A brilliant being. How absolutely true beyond all representations. Yeah. More true than any statement ever made, more alive than any crafted object. The living face of origin with feathers. What I want to get at here is beings have modes. They have modes. Let's see if this raven will take something from my hand. Maybe not today. Maybe one day. So the beings have modes, right? You have a calm being, a hungry being, an angry being, an injured being, a sick being. Yeah. A playful being, a curious being. You can imagine they might have something like modes, and the modes are very complex. They're not single-valued. Rather, the mode depends on, one's angle of approach to understanding it. But we all are aware that there are appearances that differ from our assumptions or our suppositions. And this is commonly spoken of in mystical traditions, but it's rarely as clearly or effectively spoken of as it often is in Advaita Vedanta, and in the ancient Indian philosophy, which is generally far older and more complex than anything we've got. Extremely sophisticated multimodal logics, all kinds of amazing and deeply reliable cognitive technique. Not exactly technology, but technique. Technique as a method, right? So in these traditions, I thought it was an X, but found it was a Y. So walking down an alleyway at night, I see a snake. I become concerned. Snakes can be dangerous. Although I tend to just find them fascinating. Rarely would I be concerned about a snake unless I had just stepped on it or, had triggered its defense modes somehow. So walking down an alley, I see a snake. I'm concerned. My mode changes because I'm concerned. But the snake doesn't seem to be moving. It's all coiled up or something. And then I find it was a rope. So I thought it was an X, I find it was a Y. Now this is an infinite. The reason why this proposition or this toy is powerful is not because sometimes I can mistake a rope for a snake. Or painted metal for gold. That's not why. That's a very superficial understanding of the problem. The actual problem is that there are no X's that we know what they are, because what they are is an infinite cone that is inconceivable to rational thought because it is partless, has no parts. Yeah. Parts are a convenience of thought or evaluation or analysis. So that if I saw a snake and I could traverse the orders of the cone of identity, the snake is the being of here now, I would find an infinite arrangement of insights available as I trace the snake back through its lineages and origins and natures and characteristics and so forth, to the above of all of that, to what generates snakes in time-space, and beyond that, to what generates time-space and minds and so forth. So there is no snake that I know what it is. When I say I know what it is, I only mean that the token in the category lexicon is a match, right? That over there is a rope. This over here is a snake. The problem for us moderns is that we think that once we've determined what category it matches, we then think we know who or what it is, which is formally impossible. Rationally, at least, it is impossible. Real knowledge comes from insight, relation, and the restoration of our uplink capacities to other orders of intelligences, ways of seeing, ways of knowing, ways of being together, reunion and communion. This is what the stuff that we really want arises as. But let me go back. When is a person not a person? Well, a friend recently showed me a contract I had to sign in order to get a job. And holy crap, I've never seen a document like that. I knew they existed. But essentially it was a kind of a slave-making document where I'm gonna burn down the complexity I'm going to do the single-valued thing. In all moments, circumstances, and behaviors, while you are in our employ, you will act in the best interests of the company. In other words, you will not be yourself. You will not be your name. You will be the company's representative, their lieutenant, their stand-in. Yeah? So while you are employed, you will be possessed. Your character, identity, natures, origins, and imperatives will necessarily be replaced by those of the company. And should you defect from that replacement, you will be liable for any such defection that we might identify. Wow. Okay. So when is a person not a person? Well, one of the answers is when they're in a uniform. Because when they're in a uniform, they're a function, right? They're a lieutenant. They are a representative of a simple or complex authority, which by being absent requires a representative, right? We need a stand-in. So it's very different, the mode of a being, particularly a human being, can be entirely captured by a representation, right? And they become then the quote, the stand-in for the characters and authorities of the representational system that has captured them. Right? So when you see, let's make this a little simpler. Let's say I have a friend. I'm going to call him Gabobbage. I'm just going to make up some noises. A blobbage. And I know this friend really well. We hang out all the time. But one day my friend comes to my door and something's not right. I can sense something's off. I'm not actually sure that's my friend. The name matches, the appearance matches, the clothing choices match, right? He's got the key ring and the wallet that I recognize, all of that. He has the ID. But it's not him inside. Something else is there. Now, it could be something profoundly beautiful and provocative and profound, Or it could be something extremely dangerous, lethal, and not human. When people that we care for are in what we call a bad mood, they're not, we often say, oh, she's not herself today. Well, why would we even have a phrase like that? She's not herself. What does this mean? Yeah? How do we get to that? Why do we have to state that there's a disjunction in identity? So we are trained to believe that a categorical match finishes the process of determining the identity or the qualities of the character of a situation, being, etc. Right? When this cannot be the case unless our array of concerns is so simple and so collapsed, right, so single valued, that we throw away most of what's there and come up with, oh, it's a raven. It is a raven. Very rarely have I heard someone say they are a raven, he is a raven, or she is a raven. No, it's it. It is a raven. What is this it? There's no such... Beings are not objects. How did we get this confused in language that we could even produce a statement that wrong? So there are many situations where you encounter a human and they're not a human. Or they're still partly human, but mostly they are a soldier or a police officer or a doctor or the gas station attendant or the insurance salesman, the insurance salesperson, the realtor. Right? Now, it's not weird that we should have specializations. What's weird is that our humanity can be evicted for the sake of a representation that is mostly not human or is primarily motivated to accomplish representational tasks with commodities and colonization paradigms. Right? I was thinking the other night about UFOs and UAPs, and I thought it might be a radical step in the right direction if UAP stood for unidentified awareness phenomena. And the podcast I was listening to earlier today, which I will probably link later, this was discussed, as well as another very important idea, that the sort of cargo cult problem with humans. Right? I mean, it would be ironic to discover that for millennia we had direct internal contact with a broad library of non-human intelligences. And that as those protocols, as those uplinks collapsed and broke down, then it became necessary for the phenomena to appear to us in a semi-physicalized form, right? And what a tragedy that was for both sides, because the degrees of liberty in relation are radically collapsed and nothing like what they used to be when we were simply together forever, always inside our minds and hearts and spirits. Yeah, now we have to go through this bizarre situation where something resembling a kind of a starship, not necessarily a ship that travels between stars, no, a ship made out of the same stuff stars are made out of, right? Being the same beings that stars are. So one part of the discussion orbited whether or not we became confused and the ancients had access to the cosmos directly, astrally, however you want to think about it, and they formed vehicles together, right, so that 5 people could form a vehicle together that could travel in the cosmos and relate with the intelligences, the transsentiences that give rise to it. And we got this backwards, as usual, and thought, oh no, to travel in space you got to have a vehicle, right? You need like a special car. And since space is really weird and And
I love it when
you know,
SF is on the way down.
destinations are far away. You gotta have a really weird car that can run faster than light. Because apparently we think distance is a physical fact that has to be obviated with a machine. If we had to, I mean, you can see how this paradigm collapses into abject absurdity in modernity, where we don't talk or get together, we just send each other little fucking signals in machines instead. Right? Instead of being with each other, running missions together, forging them, reforging them. Communion. The ancients had ways of concerning themselves with and understanding phenomena that differ from the categorical appearance. Right? So they could sense when the tree was not merely a tree, the sun was not merely the sun, a person was not merely a person, and they were very cautious about being captured by the language such that they could not understand the situation or their relationship or participation in producing the becomingness of an event. But they had words. Many African tribes have words like this. One of the words that I'm familiar with what is the book? It's a little book by Ernst Cassirer, I think. Cannot recall the title. It's one of my favorite books. But the people of a specific tribe would refer to what they called a tro. And the tro could be anything. What it meant was something like, it is powerful in a non-ordinary way that cannot be encompassed by thinking. And this could be any situation, or yesterday this was a tree, today it is a tro, tomorrow it is a tree, but the tro that it became will be remembered. So maybe it stays a tro. Right? We don't even have a concept like this in English. We don't have a concept that means you'll be mistaken if you apply and cease in understanding with a representational match to your category lexicon. We don't have this concept. We do have weird, similar concepts like delusion, illusion, mistake, to refer to when we make a mismatch. But we don't have an idea that would alert us to the possibility that that tree is not, at this moment, a tree, or it is not primarily a tree. Also, in case this isn't obvious, quote, what things are, unquote, they are never by themselves. With no consciousness, there are no things. Right? If our consciousness is not participating in experience, the whole concept of identity disappears. Right? It is gone. It was very similar to what would happen to human minds if the sun were to go away. Right? All that thinking and stuff, no more of that. So this is what I mean. There is an order of that which is and they who are that generates the possibility space in which we evict them with categories and labels. Yeah? There's no such thing as a tree without a mind to perceive the tree, and without a lexical intelligence to make categorical and apply categorical determinations and labels and so on. Right? So this whole landscape where we think, oh, there are separate things outside us that have existence whether or not we are there. This is not possible. Whatever kind of existence they might have, we can say nothing of it. There's no evidence of that. There's no situation in which we abstracted all the humans and then somehow found a way to analyze what then remained, right? And make declarations about its nature, quality, character, function, activity, persona, all these things. So there are sort of two different forms of when is a person not a person. And if you think about actors, this will become very apparent. The first form is when a bunch of their human features have been replaced by representations and they're carrying a gun. Right? And the second form is when, in an exalted way, the human has become the beyond of their personal self and is now, like a UFO or some non-ordinary phenomena, the avatar of forces, beings, and intelligences, transcentiences, that exist outside our category system entirely. There is no category that matches them. And if we have placeholders, well, good for us. Oh, it's divine. Okay, great. What did that tell you? Well, it's associated with the origin beings. Yeah, that's not too bad. What is producing the minds that deduce the qualities and analysans of the physical layer in which we are merely partly ensconced? There is no such thing as a raccoon that is merely a raccoon. This is the problem that language introduces. We think, we are inclined to think, and we can escape this together, which is part of my urgent goal here. We are inclined to think that once I have made the correct derivation, that is the beginning and end of knowledge. This is a dead form of knowledge, useful in a very limited scope, lethal outside of that scope. I was never merely human, but the humans convinced me that I was simply a human being. I am just a human. Hear this word all the time. It is just a this. At the end of the day, it is blah, 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 right, whatever. Whatever language is used, it's the same idea. Single valued derivative, meant to put a stop to all further insight or speculation and to settle the matter for all beings, for all time, in a bizarre emulation of an authority that never existed in nature. Right? A representational authority. No such thing. So we must seek those principles that are not mere authorities, but that the human authorization systems are representations of the absence of. And we must, I feel, together, reacquire that uplink, resurrect it, so that we can experience the intimacies of the chorus, its origins and purposes, its allies and companions. Yeah? This is my dream. This is what I am chasing. However confused and sometimes misguided my quests can become. So much more to explore, but for now I am coming back to where the noises are, the bad machines. And so I want to wind down today's walk and talk. So grateful to all those beings who dream and seek a true and beautiful way of being together for each other. The children, the mothers, the fathers, the ancestors, the sky, the sun, the earth, the living places, the living beings. I honor them with my whole heart in humble adoration. Please take a moment, like, share, comment. This is my only bow to advertising. Especially subscribe, because that's what apparently gives the channel metric magnetism. Share some of your own insights, questions, concerns, experiences, or criticisms. Support the channel in whatever way feels natural. If you'd like to support it directly, there are links in the About section of my YouTube channel. You can buy me a coffee or send a one-time donation or become a Patreon member. Though all of my content is equally free to anyone. There's no fees. I'm not trying to make money here. I'm trying to make something more profound. I wish you beauty, liberation, amazing dreams. May the spirit of insight come and dwell in your mind and heart and relationships. The spirits of origin and beauty and virtue. I wish you liberation, joyful developmental play, amazing adventures, brilliant companions, love and healing, and the fulfillment of the promise of your human incarnation this time around. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to learning together again very soon. Bye-bye for now.